on top of a struggling economy prior to these hurricanes, now we have an even bigger problem on top of all that to justify lowering rates. And the lowering rates is just going to cause the inflation to start creeping up, and these things will get a little bit more expensive. So if we're talking about the people not affected, you and I who live in the Midwest, our pocketbook is going to be affected by the fact of the inflation or also the devalue of money. So whether gas rises, 2x4s at the lumber store, groceries, our daily run to Target, whatever it is, these prices are going to start climbing and they're never going to come back down.
There's a lot of things going on around the world right now, but close to home are the two major hurricanes that have gone through the southeast in the last 2 weeks, Helene and Milton. Today is October 10th, one day after Milton wreaked havoc on the state of Florida. We're going to use today's episode to talk about how hurricanes impact the U.S. economy, the pocketbooks of our listeners, and how current events like this impact our financial bottom line. I'm Nate Crannell, joined today by Mike Neubauer, who is in sunny Colorado. Together, we've built Grand Vision Family Office, helping physicians break free of living in the rat race before it's too late, so they can live the life they imagine today, not just after retirement. We are the resource for the physicians who ask themselves this question: why wait for retirement? So, Mike, if the purpose of our Daily Dollar series is to discuss, the current events that are happening today, yesterday, even coming up tomorrow, even if we weren't personally affected by these storms, how does it affect our pocketbook?
Yeah, I think the number one way that these storms and really everything kind of going on right now is going to affect our pocketbook is going to be what we've talked about in the past, is the inflation or also the devalue of our money. So the reality is we don't have the billions and billions of dollars in the budget. We already run a deficit on the federal level. Most states also run a deficit. And there's just not money to take care of this cleanup. There's not any way besides printing money that they're going to be able to rebuild. But there's also no way that they're going to walk away and say, we're not rebuilding. They are going to rebuild. So that means the only way to do it, and what they're going to do, is they're going to print money. And at the heart of it, they truly want to be able to print money. So as difficult as this is for everybody, if you're on the government side, the saying goes that they never let a good emergency go to waste. And this is a perfect opportunity on the government side to start printing more money, getting more money in the economy, inflating away their debt a little bit, and then also totally justifies the fact that we will see interest rates come down a little bit more. With the economy in the southeast and all the devastation that was there, there's just no way that the Fed can come in and say we're going to stay steady or we're going to raise rates. I would be blown away if that happened, because on top of a struggling economy prior to these hurricanes, now we have an even bigger problem on top of all that to justify lowering rates. And the lowering rates is just going to cause the inflation to start creeping up, and these things will get a little bit more expensive. So if we're talking about the people not affected, you and I who live in the Midwest, our pocketbook is going to be affected by the fact of the inflation or also the devalue of money. So whether gas rises, 2x4s at the lumber store, groceries, our daily run to Target, whatever it is, these prices are going to start climbing and they're never going to come back down. So everything that costs $100 today, over time is quickly going to be costing $105, $110. I also see that with this inflation, the devaluing of money, it gives a little bit of an excuse to the government and to the Fed when they say inflation is rising again, to say this isn't because of interest rates, this is because of the storms that happen. Give it time, it'll be transitory, and it gives them an excuse to be able to use to justify the lower rates, because really they do want the lower rates and they need a reason for justification. They now have that.
Absolutely. I think that's the main point of how it affects most, average Americans, especially those outside of the Southeast that weren't directly impacted, their homes, their vehicles, their way of life. I think it does come back to the inflation and the ability to print, right, at will, however much money they want. I've seen several articles over the last couple of weeks, especially after Hurricane Helene, 2 weeks ago, where FEMA came out and said, hey, we've got enough money in the budget to hopefully help the victims of Hurricane Helene and maybe one more hurricane. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton, which is turning out to be even stronger and way worse than Hurricane Milton was, just went through last night, early this morning, and just blew through the state of Florida. I think I saw this morning when I was watching the news, almost 4 million people were without power. And I'm a big fan of the Weather Channel. So I was watching, what's his name, Jim. out there in the turmoil, in the mix with all the damage. And it's just tough to recover from that. 2 major hurricanes within 2 weeks is tough to come back from. And so if FEMA has a tough time going to be helping out, you mentioned it earlier, a lot of states already run on a deficit as well. What does this do to some of those southeastern states, specifically Florida, when they've got all of this cleanup to do? They've got, billions of dollars that are needed to get life back to normal. What does that do on a state level with this type of disaster?
Yeah, I mean, really, if you look at the state level, you're talking Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, I mean, even Georgia. Most of these states are not prepared for the level of damage that has come from a hurricane. And when you look at, roads and dams and the destruction, I mean, it's probably going to go more than $1 trillion in damage by the time it's all said and done. And there's just no state out there that has $1 trillion of extra money just in case something comes up like this. So this is where the emergency plan comes into action. We talked about this before when we did the financial summit, is states don't have a money printer, but the federal government does have the money printer. So what the states have to do is declare a state of emergency. When that's approved, it opens up for federal funding, which basically allows the federal government to print that money and send it down to the states. So that's why they come out and say, hey, we have a state of emergency. And that's basically saying we need access to the money that the federal government has. So the states will have to bear some of the burden, of course. And of course, they have all the responsibility. It's not like the feds are coming down and rebuilding the roads of a small community. They'll maybe be working on interstates, but the reality is those communities have to take care of that. But from the financial burden and the financial aspect, a lot of this money, if not all of it, will come from the federal government. They will pass different acts that allow more money to be printed off. They'll release bonds, whatever they have to do. Some things are already allowed with the state of emergency. Some, because of the destruction, will take entire new infrastructure bills that release even more money. But at the end of the day, nobody has this money. So the only way they're going to get that is by printing it. And when you look at, I saw like I-40, and I think the other one was 25 or something through Tennessee. I mean, huge swaths of the entire expressway are closed indefinitely right now until they get a plan in place to rebuild that. And that was never expected. That's far outside of what the current infrastructure plan was already supposed to take care of. So now you have entire major expressway, miles and miles of these expressways and bridges that have to get rebuilt. And the reality is nobody has the money. Nobody can plan for this, especially not states that never see hurricane damage. They definitely didn't plan on all of their dams collapsing and washing away roadways. So the reality is that money is going to come from the federal government. It's going to be printed. It's going to go into the hands of whoever needs it. Contractors are going to be there. There's going to be billions and billions, if not over $1 trillion, exchanging hands and basically making its way into the economy that wasn't there prior to these hurricanes going through.
Yeah, just the impact, especially in Tennessee and North Carolina, of the transportation on those roads. Like, it's millions of dollars a day of product that's going down the interstate in semi-trucks that now it gets diverted, gets delayed. That's just going to drive up prices because supply and demand, the demand is still there, but if the supply is lacking or lagging, even both, it's going to increase prices. We did an episode a few weeks ago on the Fed rate dropping 0.5%. People got excited. Hey, there's going to be more demand for housing and things like that because of interest rates dropping. How do these hurricanes that have now come, in the weeks after, and the money printing machine that you were talking about, how do you see that affecting, that drop in interest rates that the Fed did back in September?
Yeah, so if you're affected by the storm, I mean, we can't even touch that with the 10-foot pole because everybody's going to be different. I mean, I cannot imagine the devastation for the people that are in those states and their communities washed away. I mean, they're going to have a long road to recovery. I think everybody will get back. Every place that this has ever happened, it always comes back stronger and more prepared and more beautiful than ever. But I mean, I just can't even imagine being those people and having to go through that rebuilding process and just washing away the things that just are irreplaceable, the memories and the photo albums and all of those different things. So I just want to make clear that we're not talking about that at all because that's unimaginable for me. But to answer your question specifically, for those of us in every other part of the United States, the reality is that we're going to feel the same effects of all this money printing and the lowering of the interest rates to try to support the Southeast. And what you're going to see is when money is easier, prices are going to rise. So I would assume that the housing market is going to start to grab another boom. I would assume interest rates are going to come down even a little bit more to try to build up, because people are going to have to borrow money in the Southeast and they're going to be borrowing billions collectively. So the interest rate has to be low enough to make that possible? Well, the reality is us up in the Midwest, we're all going to have access to those same interest rates, and that's going to drive demand then because we have easier money flowing now. We're going to have things like, possible stimulus packages and different things to try to build up and put a foundation underneath there. And when money is easier and you're not affected by all of that damage, you're more likely to go out and make purchases. The other thing, you're probably going to have a ton of people that are relocating, that maybe moved to Tennessee, moved to Florida, all these different areas, and they want to go start a life there, and now their whole life has been washed away, and maybe their family is back up in the Midwest. You're going to see a lot of people coming and taking these properties that are in the states that were not affected, so you're just going to have a little bit more demand side there for the housing as well. So if we're talking housing specifically, I personally think that you're going to see a rise in housing now. I think rates are going to come down. I think people are going to start buying more, and as that happens, it's going to shift, maybe not quite totally to a seller's market, but for sure more to a neutral market. You talk about housing too. I have a house in Florida that we took back that we just were getting ready for rent. I haven't heard yet, 100% whether Milton caused damage or not, but let's assume that it didn't cause damage there. I don't know how that's going to affect it. Are people in the affected areas going to be looking for housing? Are people going to be fleeing the state of Florida? That's very hard when you're talking about that local economy, how that's going to play out there. But where we're talking outside of the destruction area, I think housing is going to really see a boom once this winter period goes away. Of course, we have the election tied in there as well. But if we didn't have the election, if we just had money printing and lower interest rates, 9 times out of 10, that's going to lead to a spike in housing prices. I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days, to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-Day Challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
Yeah, that's really good insight. And I'm going to echo that sentiment. I can't imagine what people down in Florida that were affected by the storm are going through. Again, watching the Weather Channel and just seeing people's homes and the streets flooded, and, they already had couches and, their lives out on the curb, from damage of Helene. And then it just gets re-damaged or scattered because of Hurricane Milton. I just can't imagine what they're going through. But, in their mind, they're looking at the timeline of like, how long is it going to take us to get back to normal? Our normal lives. We've been affected. How can we get back to life, how it used to be pre-hurricane? In that same sense, when we're thinking on an economic level, like how long do you see this easing happening? The kind of the lowering of interest rates, the demand building up, not specifically about housing, but just the economy and holistically. How long do you see that lasting before it gets back to quote unquote normal?
Yeah, that's a super hard question to answer, because if you think back to the most recent prior to that, even if we go back to Katrina when it wiped away New Orleans and you had similar effects, and then you had the housing crisis, and then we had COVID, and now we have these 2 hurricanes and the devastation. I mean, really the Tennessee and North Carolina devastation is going to be just so much money for those bridges and roadways and dams. But when you look at these, it's very hard to ever guess how long it's going to take to rebuild, because COVID, they thought, may last for years, and it turned out to really be about a year of very intense COVID restrictions, money printing, and then it started to fade away, and actually the housing market boomed during that time. You look at Katrina, was followed by the housing crisis. So it's very hard to really know how long this rebuilding is going to take, but also it's impossible to know what is coming next. So even if the rebuilding, if we project it's going to take, say, 2 years, well, 2 years is a long time that we may have another hurricane, we may have an avalanche, an earthquake. We don't know what else is coming. So it's very hard to ever nail down an exact time. All we can say is that in the coming months, and most likely for at least a year, you're going to see a lot of monetary easing, because the monetary easing, the lower interest rates at the heart of it, if they can do it without inflation, it makes life easier on the government when they can print money and nobody raises a red flag. Nobody cares, because it's to help the people that are American citizens that were affected by these storms. If that is the backdrop of lowering rates and printing money, it's usually pretty easy to sell that. So really the timeline comes down to the fact of, politically, how long can they justify lowering rates and having money easing policies without causing too much inflation, where the population now starts to say, all right, prices are through the roof, what is going on? And then they have to do something. So it's a balancing act where they don't want to create that hyperinflation, but they definitely love the inflation and the money printing ease, because that makes policies way easier when you could just print money and who cares how you're going to come up with it, you just print it. That makes life a lot easier when you're a politician. You enjoy having that freedom. It's just a matter of how long will the American people give you that freedom before they say, all right, what are we doing here with printing money? And you can see already when people look at Israel, Gaza, Hamas, the Ukraine war, and now these hurricanes back home, the sentiment was 100% shifting, saying, all right, stop giving money overseas. What are we doing? That was kind of the American population sentiment. When you just see random Facebook and Instagram posts, you can feel that that's the way the people are leaning. Now we have devastation at home. All of a sudden, everybody is back on the train of do whatever we have to take care of them, rebuild, which I get it, and I'm totally a fan of as well, because if I were in that situation, I would be begging for a lifeline. So I totally understand it. But you can see that that war effort and that money printing machine was starting to lose sentiment of the American people. Now the American people are back in favor of it, and it opens up that freedom again for the government to say, all right, we can go ahead and print money now, before, we're starting to kind of lose that ability and we really had to watch inflation, because the sentiment was more saying prices are getting too high. What are you doing? Now that sentiment's kind of backing off again.
Yeah. And people just thinking about like the money going to Ukraine, for example. At the beginning when that war was, all over the news, people were like, yeah, send them money, help out Ukraine. Now that we've had these disasters, we've had these things going on in the US, people are like, hey, let's keep the money stateside, and help our own type of thing. As you were talking, I was looking up the FEMA budget. We've talked about budgets before and how even if there is a budget number, a lot of times if they need more, they just print it, and it doesn't really matter. The FEMA budget in 2023 and 2024 was about $30 billion. 2023 was $30.1 billion. 2024, it was $30.5 billion. They had already planned, pre-hurricanes, had planned to increase the budget for 2025 for FEMA to $33.1 billion. So an increase of about $2.5 billion, excuse me. How do you think that budget changes now with these two hurricanes? Do you think the government will be a little bit more proactive to say, okay, back-to-back hurricanes this year could happen again? Like if that was out of the realm of possibility, now we know it is possible. How do you see budgeting for natural disasters like this changing in the future? And then how does that really affect the overall national budget?
Yeah, I think if you also looked at the stats of when's the last time FEMA stayed within their budget, I'm sure they have not done that in a long time. So, really the budget thing it's kind of silly at the end of the day, because nobody stays within their budget. And when they go over, they just request more money, and there's always a disaster to justify it, and they do whatever they want. So they produce a budget, they act like it means something, but the moment they run out of money, they just print more. And they have a big thing on the news, we're going to have a government shutdown unless we can come up with a government spending bill. It always gets to that point. We always get the government spending bill and the money just starts flowing again. So I honestly don't think it'll have any effect. I don't think that if you look at the disasters that have come in the past and you see the devastation, the amount of money, I don't get how you could ever assume that FEMA could operate on a $22 billion budget and take care of wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes and bridges getting hit in Baltimore and all these things that happen. I don't think there's any way in the world. This disaster went through with Helene, those bridges and the dams, and now Florida getting devastated by the second one. That's probably going to be the cost of 5 years of FEMA budget. So when you knock out 5 years of budget with two back-to-back storms, I don't get how you could even consider whether the budget means anything at all. So I think the budget has no influence. They'll pick whatever number they want and they'll just print whatever money they need in the future. And the other thing that I think, I do see these posts sometimes, on Facebook and stuff, they talk about like that stuff. Keep money at home. Don't be sending our taxpayer money overseas. And granted, like you said, when Ukraine war first broke out, we were in favor of helping. There's GoFundMes for Ukraine. Everybody wanted to help. The thing that people don't realize is our tax money doesn't even touch the budget that we have already. So when we're sending money overseas, we're not sending our tax money, we're just printing money and sending it. When we take care of all this destruction from the hurricanes, it's not like that's our tax money doing it. Our tax money was spent long ago. We don't have any more money, we're just printing it at this point. So it's not really our tax money, it's just printing money. Our taxes bring in something like $5 trillion a year. Our top 4 budget items wipe away that $5 trillion right out of the gate. So when we start talking about additional things, it's not tax money because nobody's raising taxes. They're just using what they have and printing the rest. So it really doesn't matter how we spend the money. It doesn't matter what the budget says, because at the end of the day, they're just going to print money for what they need. The thing is, we have a two-party system that if one prints money unnecessarily, the other party's going to call them out to try to win an election. That's why when these disasters happen, that's why when a war in Ukraine breaks out, they take advantage of it for the moment. They're printing money, sending it to Ukraine because everybody's in favor of protecting Ukraine for the moment. At some point, that sediment runs dry. At some point, these hurricanes will be old news and there'll be something new. But while these emergencies pop up, that's the government's green light to start printing money, and nobody can really say otherwise because it's for a good cause. The budgets at the end of the day just don't mean anything because we run a budget deficit. So at the end of the day, we say, how much money are we going to make? How much do we owe? We always owe more than we make anyways. It really doesn't matter if we got to print more at the end of the day than what we budgeted for.
Absolutely. I saw in an article recently, they were just trying to not necessarily quantify, but I guess kind of visualize the federal spending, right? And so if the federal spending and the money that's gone to Ukraine and to other efforts, if you look at all the different countries that the U.S. supports on an annual basis, the billions of dollars that we send overseas, if you visualize that as like a swimming pool, our actual tax dollars are like taking a 12-ounce cup of water and pouring it into the swimming pool, really just to kind of backfill the money we've already spent. And so the picture was an animated drawing of a swimming pool, half filled up, and it said government spending, and it was U.S. tax dollars being poured in. It was just a guy standing there with a little, like a solo cup, pouring water in. It really doesn't. It's not the antithesis of what actually gets spent and sent overseas. It's just frustrating, from an American perspective, to see all that money going out, and then seeing the devastation of, friends, family that are in some of these states, affected by these natural disasters, not seeing the money go to them, but instead to go to complete strangers, on the other side of the world. So the idea is there, but the actual financial economics behind it don't match what our feelings do, which is pretty common over the last, 300 years of our country.
Yeah, that's way more of a political statement, when the media is pushing that money is going to Ukraine and not going here. The reality is that's just not true. Maybe money's not flowing there as rapidly right now as people would like to see, or maybe you have loved ones here locally, so you see that devastation, where if you were from Ukraine and you saw that devastation, you would be much more personally affected by that as well. But the reality is, because we're sending money to Ukraine does not mean we don't have money to send to the Southeast. And that's what people think. They portray themselves in their financial situation onto the government spending. And they think if I send money in one direction, that means I have less money to send in another direction. But for the federal government, that's just not the case. No matter how much they send in any direction, that money printer is just punching in numbers on a computer. They can add more money at the drop of a hat. Really, their question is, when we print money, how much is too much, where inflation takes off? And as long as they're putting it in different areas, and as long as other countries are printing money at an equal or faster rate than us, we have open ability to print money. The problem comes if we print money much quicker than other countries, then we will lose value in our dollar compared to other currencies. But that's just not the case right now. Right now, other countries are doing it at equal or faster rate than us, which gives us freedom to print money, which means it doesn't matter where we send money. We have unlimited resources to keep sending money in all directions. And I guarantee you that when this Tennessee, North Carolina, and Florida is all said and done, it will be rebuilt more grandiose and amazing than ever. Of course, we'll lose a lot of that charm that you just can't replace 100%, but those towns will be rebuilt. everybody on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, are going to vote for those bills because everybody supports them. If you vote against a bill for $50 billion to rebuild Asheville, North Carolina, whether you're Republican or Democrat, if you vote against it, the American people are going to be against you for putting that down. So those bills are going to get passed. That money is going to print immediately. It takes a little time to figure out how much do we actually need, who's going to be the one to make this happen, how do we get that money into the hands of the American people to try to avoid the corruption that comes along with all this money printing. That takes a little bit of time to iron out, but that is coming. There is no doubt that the billions and billions, they're not just going to say, sorry, these dams are broken forever, we don't have the money, because they're always weighing the economic benefits. They're saying printing money, what will that do for devaluing our dollar, and what will that do for inflation? Okay, that's the risk of printing money. What if we just say, sorry, you guys are on your own, we're not printing money? What does that do to the economy? And more importantly, what does that do to us winning the next election? And we all know that that risk is too high right now, so they're going to print money like crazy, and they're going to rebuild these beach towns. They're going to rebuild the dams stronger than ever. These towns on the rivers are going to get an influx of money, and Asheville is going to be booming once again. It's devastating, but there's no doubt that the government is not going to leave them just struggle and wash away. They are going to rebuild, and they are going to print money until that is as beautiful or more beautiful than it ever was.
Yeah, 100%. It's as simple as, hey, we sent money overseas, so we don't have money for these dams and these roads and these beach towns. It's just, we don't have the money yet because we haven't printed it yet. And once we print
we just don't have the policies in place yet.
Yep.
You know, we haven't discussed the policies. We haven't discussed how much is this dam going to cost. I mean, if you put all the effort and you do a bill for $50 billion, and then they come back with estimates and say this actually is going to cost $180 billion, well, now you look like an idiot. You're $130 billion short. You got to redo this whole thing. You got to do the vote again. Now elections have passed, and we have new people that want to get their name on the bill. So it just takes a little time for the dust to settle. Granted, there's no way to know 100% what the recovery efforts look like in the immediate term. I pray to God that they're doing, what the Democrats say they're doing. I hope they're doing what the Republicans say they're not doing. I hope that's not true. Apolitical, I don't really care who is right, who is wrong. I just pray that people are getting the help that they need, and we're giving the full resources possible. But at the end of the day, there is no doubt that the money to rebuild, once the emergency portion is over, the money is going to flow in, and they just need to mobilize and get all those resources there. I mean, it's going to take millions of contractors. It's going to take companies that don't exist today to start up and rebuild that project. There's not enough people right now that are skilled trade to go in there and just totally start rebuilding, because there's all kinds of infrastructure and all kinds of projects going on already across America. There's all kinds of demand for those construction trades, and now we just poured on $1 trillion more of demand. So it's going to take some time to iron all of that out, but I would be willing to bet anything that I have that money is going to come flowing, and that's going to rebuild better than ever.
Absolutely. So final thoughts, just thinking about what the biggest takeaways are for the average American listening, again, outside of those affected in those southeastern states, but really what to expect, in the aftermath of these two hurricanes is, you said at the beginning of the episode, inflation, right? Inflation is going to drive things up. It's also going to drive rates down. There's going to have to be some easing and some, support financially from the Fed, from the government, to be able to get things back to normal. It won't be quick. We really don't know how long it is, but there will be some steps being taken here, in the coming months that will provide some relief to most everyone.
Yeah, final thoughts. I think the stock market, I would assume, is going to do pretty well. I think it will be inflated dollars. I think on real terms, I don't think that the stocks will perform tremendously. I think it'll be mostly printed money, but I think that will stabilize the stock market from huge drops because it will just be inflated money. So even if it goes up 5% and that feels good, your purchasing power really didn't go up 5%. That would be my guess on the stock market side of things. I think the bonds will struggle a little bit because I think rates are going to continue to come down. There's going to be more justification now for cheap money, the ability to borrow money to rebuild these dams and these projects and get that money out into the government or into the hands of the people to rebuild. I think the government is going to drop the rates and push them lower to make that money easier flowing out into the economy. That's what they need to do. So I think on the bond side, you're going to see that. I think on the housing side, I think I would be lining up to be ready. If I bought a house in the last year or so, I'd be looking to lock in a refinance coming up, let's say in the next 6 months. I'd see kind of what the Fed does coming up with the next rate cycle when they have their meeting and see how much they drop, or if they drop, I believe they will, but how much they drop, and see kind of their wording and their projections if they're going to drop again. But I'd be ready to refi and lock in that 30-year mortgage as low as I can. Just like when COVID happened, if you could lock in that 30-year mortgage, you're set forever, because inflation is going to make that payment seem like nothing come 5-10 years down the road. So I'd be ready for that opportunity. And I'd be looking, if I was investing, I'd be looking into lock real assets right now. I think as this inflation and this easy money pours into the economy, I think those assets, like properties, commercial properties, are going to take off again. And I think the values are going to be pushed higher by lower interest rates. I think the money's going to pump into the economy, which is going to allow rents on all types of asset classes to rise again. And I think the value, or the price of the property, maybe not necessarily the value, but the price of the property will rise. When COVID happened, we saw a lot of that, people paying top dollar and prices just blowing out of the water. I think you may see an uptick of that again. So you really want to be prepared and kind of get on the front side of that. You don't want to wait until the $8 million apartment complex is now selling at $10 million, and you could have jumped on it $2 million lower, today. So that's what I would be looking for. That's what I would be expecting. Final thing too is saving money sitting in a bank account, even in a high yield savings at 4%. That high yield savings is going to drop as the Feds drop. So you may be looking at 3.5% coming up, and inflation is going to rise by those interest rates dropping. So leaving that money parked in a savings account is going to have a double-edged sword. Your interest rate that you gain is going to continue to drop. The inflation that money is basically losing the value while it sits there is going to continue to rise. So you're going to hit double whammy there. So saving money, not parking it in assets, not getting it into some sort of an investment that does well when inflation takes off. I think those are kind of my final thoughts of what I would be looking to do, with my money and the money that we manage for people in the fund.
For sure. Valuable insights as always from you, Mike. We'll be back again with another Daily Dollar as the news arises. Talk to you later.
See you, man.